Done by Noon podcast. Today we're talking about how to create a PKM, a personal knowledge management system.
You're listening to the Done by Noon podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs who want to achieve more by noon than others in a full day. Serial entrepreneur Dave Ruel and his co-host Chris Lopez share the strategies that will help you optimize your productivity, performance, and lifestyle so you can reach new heights in your business and life. So if you're ready to become the most efficient and effective entrepreneur you know, you're in the right place. Welcome to the show.
This episode is brought to you by the Epic Planner, the first planner made for the entrepreneurial brain. It's easy to fill your day with busy work. You feel like you're getting a lot done. But if you don't make time for bigger projects, you're just spinning your wheels and hurting your business. The Epic Planner is backed by a complete system to strategically plan your next 90 days. Break down projects into actionable bite-sized pieces. Optimize your work week and implement sustainable performance habits in the process. To learn more about the Epic Planner, go to www.effic.co. That's EFFIC.co. And use coupon code PODCAST at checkout to receive 10% off your order. Now, back to Dave and Chris.
Chris Lopez.
What's up?
El campeón de voleibol. How do you say volleyball in Spanish?
Volleyball in Spanish, it's volleyball.
Volleyball? So
It's the same. It's the same. It's
and
the same thing.
Is champion campeón?
Champion, campeón, yeah.
Campeón, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
There you go. Hey, my rusty Spanish is
There you go. Your Spanish is on point, brother.
I didn't Google Translate it, I promise. For
You know what? That thing is like the number one most visited site on my computer. Google Translate is
Really?
Yeah, it's on point.
I took Spanish as a second language from grade as a third language because French is my first language.
Right.
English is my second, but I spoke English, as a second language most of my life. And from grade, grade 6 until grade 12, I took Spanish as a third language. I had the option to take 2 second languages.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah.
No, I took Spanish in high school. Didn't remember a lick of it. Like
Really, yeah?
Yeah. I took French all the way through, and I can speak more French than I can Spanish.
But the thing is that Spanish is it's a Latin base, so it's a lot closer to French. So there's a lot like the grammar, like it's not the same, but it there's a lot of similarities. Like English to a Latin language is a totally different ball game.
Well, you know what? It's funny because I was talking to Roseanne about this, or Roseanne was mentioning this. But like with English, there are a lot of sounds and symbols that you have to memorize, and so English speakers have a tendency to understand metaphor and different things a lot better because that's part, like sarcasm, because that's just part of our like we have to recognize patterns and symbols within the language, the English language, whereas something like Roman based or Latin based, like French or like Spanish is very literal, right? Like you look at it and that's basically how it sounds, especially in Spanish. Like if you look at something and the way it's spelled, like that's how it sounds. Whereas in English, if you say something like enough, like phonetically, you would think it would be ENUF, but it's not. It's ENOUGH. And so we recognize these patterns and these different sounds in the English language, whereas within Spanish, it's very literal. So
and this thing, but there's things in French language, that there's like like letters that you don't pronounce and things like that could be tricky,
Yeah.
But you're right. Like it's Spanish is a lot like that. Anywho, PKM, man. So you introduced me to like a personal knowledge management systems. Like, let's talk about it. We started talking about like, let's not continuing the conversation. I'm going to record that. So what?
Okay.
Tell us about like PKMs, why you needed a personal knowledge management system at this point of your life.
Because the older I get, the dumber I get. I'm fine. My memory's starting to go, Dave.
You don't remember things. Like, you find that like kids, like when you say something to a kid and 6 months later it's like 6 months ago you said this, exactly this, and they're not forgetting. Yeah. And I'm like, I barely remember what I said, this morning.
Yeah, like, and so that's why I started doing more research into it. Like, it was introduced to me. The whole idea of a PKM was introduced to me by my friend and business coach Andre, and
Andre Chaperon?
on Andre Chaperon.
Let's plug
Yeah.
Andre, tinylittlebusiness.com. Is that what it is?
Yep. Yeah. Fantastic writer. And what he had, the way he introduced it was that you can't remember everything. And part of coming up with good ideas within business or within your life is your ability to make connections with concepts that necessarily wouldn't normally be related. Like, so for example, like the example that I was giving you when we were talking before we started recording was, you liken load management and you connected that with business and how you're supposed to manage your energy and everything. And we talked about load management in sport as, playing every other game or whatever what the Raptors did with Kawhi Leonard when they won that championship season. And so that's a connection that you made. So the idea behind a personal management system or a personal knowledge management system is you're inundated, especially these days, with a bunch of information and different ideas and different ways of information approaching you. And so a PKM, which you can think of as almost like a second brain, is a way to take all of this information and to be able to record the information and then later on try to make connections with them for use in your business or in like a presentation or being able. So the PKM is basically something that you draw back upon when it's time for you to create.
So pretty much like instead of just on purposely like ignoring information, you actually acknowledge information, but you can take it out or use it at the right moment.
Right. Well, I mean, you have to have a good filter and you have to understand like what information is useful to you. And if you do find that it's something interesting or something that sparks curiosity, then you record it in a note. And then the idea behind all the notes that you record within this system is that you have all of these notes, but I mean, and there are certain rules that I kind of follow when I record these notes. So, and this is all based on what's called the Zettelkasten system. And Zettelkasten was created by, I believe, it was a gentleman named Luhmann or Lorman, a German gentleman who, in his lifetime, he published, I think it was over 70 books and over like 300 papers. He was either a physicist or a social psychologist or something like that. But this was his system. And Zettelkasten, translated from German, means basically it means note box or slip box. And so you're recording notes and you're putting it in a box and then with the ability to be able to draw on them later to generate ideas or to be creative and create your own stuff with it.
So what do you use? What do you use? The software? How do you go about that?
So right now I'm using a software. When I first started this about a year and a half ago, I started using a piece of software called the Archive. And you can get access to the Archive there's a couple of designers that created it. And it's just a text-based type of thing. And you can, if you go to Zettelkasten, .de because it's German. Zettelkasten is Zettelkasten.de, and it talks about the whole system. And so I bought their software, which is called the Archive, and I've been using that, creating notes within that, updating notes. So one note is not set in stone. Like if you find different information on a specific topic, you can continue to add to it and iterate from there on where you want to take it. And then I also started using another one, which is a little bit more visual for me because I'm a visual learner, and that's called Obsidian. And these are all open source, so you can get it. You can give a donation if you like, but for the most part, they're open source. And so I'm using Obsidian to be able to visualize connections a little bit more, because that's one of the rules when you're creating these notes is that, like, well, one of my personal rules is like, if I create a note, I have to create at least one link to another note that's already in the box.
Got it.
So, or that's already in the software, so that I have these preconceived connections already whenever I open a note. And so that's the idea. So my rules for creating these notes in this personal management system is similar to like a lot of my webs. Like I'm very much of the philosophy of on my websites of one page, one idea.
Yes.
Right. So for the notes, it's the exact same thing. It's one note, one idea.
Okay.
And then
So it's
from
not
there,
a journal per se. It's like an idea, one note, one idea.
exactly.
You're not
Yes.
just barfing your brain on it. Or...
Exactly. Yeah. Because you have to be able to filter back. So for example, like right now I'm doing a lot of research on anti-aging and mitochondria and mitochondrial health. So I have a bunch of notes that reference mitochondria, and I have a one like index note that talks about mitochondria, and that'll reference back to that. But then I also talk about anti-aging. But that anti-aging note will also link back to sleep health, which is something we were talking about in a previous podcast. And then from sleep health, that connects to melatonin and sunlight and vitamin D, and like so there's all these little connections that happen within this system, and it's through that system that I'm able to, like, I'm writing an article right now where I'm really leveraging the use of all of these notes that I created. And there's like a bunch of studies that I've looked up. So yeah, so that's kind of how a personal knowledge management system works, at least in my eyes. And then I think one of the things that I really should mention is that you have to really try not to categorize these notes. Like these notes should be very free flowing. You can have tags to help link them, but they shouldn't be filed under categories per se, because the notes have to be very dynamic. They have to, they'll be very multidisciplinary, if you want to say that.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's not like the idea box where the idea is categorized by actually category. Now it's actually a node that needs to be free flowing in order to connect with other nodes and makes a kind of a coherent unit in the end,
Exactly. Yeah. So you can't be afraid to, I guess not afraid, but like you should understand that you're going to make connections with something that you probably initially thought had nothing to do with something else.
Yes.
Right. And then that's when the brilliance of it, and that's when the creativity starts to come out.
That's when you do things and things click, and you're like, and you look back and like, and now you connect the dots, and you're like, oh, this happened, so this happened, so this happened,
exactly.
so this happened, and it's like, okay, and now we're here, right?
Yeah. That's exactly it. Like,
but that's a natural process that happens in your brain, right?
Exactly. And that's why they call it a second brain, because but now you're just intentionally making these connections. So like a perfect, like a real live example is Roseanne and I just did a presentation a couple of days ago, and we were trying to figure out, so the presentation was about building communities, but we were trying to figure out how to present all of it and how to make it like impactful. And there was a conceptual model that Roseanne had read before there's a psychologist named Scott Barry Kaufman, who he created a conceptual model of a boat and reframing how you thought about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so he used this whole boat concept. And then within that, I actually had that in my PKM. We connected that to habits, and there was something that the author James Clear has a model that he calls the bullseye model. How you can't be outcomes based, you have to be very identities based, and if you want to establish a habit. And so we connected that model with the Scott Barry Kaufman model, even though one has really nothing to do with each other, in a sense. But once we found that connection, because the connection was identity, becoming the person that does a certain type of thing. Yeah. Well, when you talk about identity, that identity is connected to the hull of the boat, which is what Scott Barry Kaufman was talking about, which is safety, connection, and self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And so basically that's what we did. We made the connection, but that wouldn't have occurred if it weren't for a PKM and really trying to connect that together.
I love it, man, because it's not just like I'm thinking, and as we talk, I'm thinking about Evernote and I'm thinking about different things. And it's like, that's totally different way to go. It's not like just connecting things into a bucket or box that are similar. Yeah. It's actually interconnecting ideas that could be totally random, but that makes sense. And
exactly, from like multiple disciplines, multiple facets of life, like
yeah.
And my bandwidth these days is, like it is multidisciplinary. Like I've got my coaching clients, I've got my online business, I've got the volleyball club I'm running, I've got, we've got the kids, there's the podcast that you and I do together. That like there's a bunch of different projects, but within each one, I'm doing research for each one, and like I'm basically creating all of these notes and putting them into this box, and then there are some connections that happen and ideas that are generated from that. So
I'm thinking about, like, I'm just thinking as you say that, but I'm just wondering if it would be a good thing to do as I, to work on my second book, like putting note, because I'm kind of, I have a pretty good idea of what my next book is going to be about, and I get a pretty good idea the content overall, like the I know the buckets, like I know the big parts, but I'm researching on different topics or
Right.
subtopics and everything like that. But I'm opening books, I'm browsing, and I'm like trying to connect ideas together. Like I and I think I should do that, like in order to create my next book. Because there's a lot of things I just want it to be, as you said, it needs to be your own kind of style, but connect the ideas, and then it's based on how you process the ideas.
But that's the essence of creativity, right? Like that's it's being able to make these connections that nobody would have ever made before.
But you do it, like, usually you can do it, and I said, like, with your first brain.
That's right. Yeah.
But it's not easy to do in the second brain. You know what I mean? I feel like, for example, like the book could probably happen a lot faster if I use something like that consistently, let's say for the next few months.
Right. But you know what? In truth, the connections do happen in what you call your first brain, but but you can't remember all of these ideas, and which is why you need that second brain.
Exactly.
Right.
But that's the thing. Like when you have, you use too much RAM, the computer is slower.
Yeah.
So your creativity is not as high.
Right. Yeah. So you open up a lot of bandwidth if you're able to take these ideas and put them away and then come back to them when you need them.
Exactly. Right. And I think that's why a lot of people actually don't end up writing a book, because it's a lot of research, a lot of ideas, and it's putting them all together. That's the challenge. Yeah. And I found like that was, when I wrote Done by Noon, that was the challenge, even though that was a topic that I, wrote, spoke, thought for a long time. But even like putting that into a cohesive unit on a piece of paper, that's different,
Yep. Yeah. So, and the thing is like, it's what I'm finding with this PKM is that it's very much habit based. So I have a specific time in my day where I go back into my notebook and then start recording notes that I feel might be relevant to something that I want to do. So I have a little moleskin notebook that I carry around. It's like one of these little reporter's notebooks. And if I have a thought about something or something that I want to research, or maybe it's something that I read, I'll write that down. And then the next day in the morning, I have like my PKM time, which is just 30 minutes. And then I'll input some thoughts and ideas on notes into this system on my laptop. And that's part of my morning process.
Gotcha. So what you said, like the archive is, I'm trying to like put all the notes together, but you said the archive, and that's based on what again?
The archive is it's text based. So you want to try to make it as non-proprietary as you can. So something like Evernote would work, but the problem with that is that it's not transferable. Like it's only within the Evernote system, whereas the archive is just a list and an organization of text files, which you can input into any system or any piece of software that you want. And then the other one that I'm playing with right now, which is more of it allows me to see the connections visually, is Obsidian. And it's for the exact same purpose, except it's more visual.
So almost like how do you call that?
Obsidian, Obsidian.
TIAN. Oh,
yeah. And there are other paid versions. Like there's one that's really popular right now is this thing called Roam Research. So that's another really popular one. But I think that is also proprietary. But if you take a look at the Obsidian website, which is obsidian.md, you can see visually how everything's connected.
I'm on the site right now. I love it. Yeah, you're right. It's a lot more visual. Yeah, I can see that.
So
Oh,
that's, for me, that's a lot more like I like being able to see the connections visually, even
yeah.
though I know that they occur on like a text side. Like being able to see the connections visually is a lot is better for me and the way I think. So
Oh,
it
and it's a
really just
one-time
depends.
it's a one-time payment too, right? So I look at it.
Obsidian, yeah, it
Yeah,
is. Yeah.
I love it. Obsidian, OBSIDIAN .MD. I'm gonna take a look. I don't know it, and I gotta say, like I've worked. The thing with ideas for me, like used the idea box, for example, that system to control my crazy brain. Like actually, it was not about storing ideas; it was actually taming the beast. It was
Yeah.
actually okay. Curate the idea. You need to curate the ideas better before in order not to act on stuff that doesn't matter.
Right.
So like and teaching my brain how to curate that, and then all just the best like filters and the best ideas remain.
Yeah.
But I find like for example, in the creative process, like a book, for example, there's no bad ideas. It's just an idea that might fit in the book or not, but it's part of the expansion of how how you research load management. I mean, it's a vast concept, and then you can tie it in different things, right? So for me, I tied in the Kawhi Leonard story because it was a perfect example of it.
Right.
But it doesn't always happen like that. I remember when it happened, and I was like, that's so weird. And I don't want to say, okay, I don't want to say that because it's wishing bad on someone. But remember in the playoffs, so the whole. If you read Done by Noon, you'll know. There's an article as well that I wrote on LinkedIn about load management, but the Kawhi story about how they manage his workload, and he sat out for more than 20 games during the year, but then it was a beast in the playoffs. But they manage his workload really really well. I was like, as I was writing, more about load management and collecting the dots, I was like, this is so much the perfect example. I mean, imagine if the Raptors would win.
Yeah.
Like if they would win, like that would be the perfect example. And I was like, I was rooting for the Raptors because yes, I wanted the trophy to come back to Canada, but it was like, that will prove my point. That will
I know
prove my point.
exactly
You
my
know what I mean?
idea is, yeah.
That will prove my point. That was going to be so good in the book. And remember when they played Durant in the finals,
Oh,
and they
yeah.
brought him back way too early.
Yep.
And because of poor load management during the season,
Yeah.
and they brought him back, and it was like, I was like, I hope he gets hurt so it proves my point even more. But again, I mean,
Yeah,
big
you
fan
don't
of
wish
Kevin
ill on
Durant.
him, but
I
yeah.
didn't want Kevin, and he played well for like the quarter that he played in, and I don't want it like you'd never want to wish that on someone, and it sucked because then he had to miss kind of another season, and that was
He
another
ruptured
story.
his
That was like
Achilles. Yeah.
that's like exact perfect example that load management like. And that's a tragic story. That was a success story, but the tragic story about Durant was like, wow, okay, well, that proves my point even more. That sucks for Kevin, but geez, like there's a point proven there, right? But yeah, that's the thing. I love. Thanks, Kawhi. Thanks. But no, thanks, Alex McKenchny, the sports science coach at for the Raptors, who like managed it perfectly. But that's a great. That's why I'm always tying in sports analogies and sports performance analogies into what I do, because it can be illustrated perfectly, right?
That was the perfect example. Like
Mhm.
that's the perfect example of connecting two things that normally would not be related.
With real life, and it just happened. But that was funny. That I was anticipating the thing to happen, but when I thought about it, like it just happened. See, if I hadn't done the work prior, like the dots would not have been connected live, and I was like, if this happens, but
Exactly.
so it's a kind of a different way for me to. I don't really operate like, but I'm going to try this. Like seriously, I'm going to be working on a new second brain for
It
sure.
takes patience. That's the
Yeah.
thing. Like it's like, so you really do have to habitualize it. I think that's the best way to make it effective is to habitualize it, to try to make it part of your daily process.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and so it really, what I find it, or what I've heard, is that it really works for knowledge workers like you and I, like
Yeah.
creatives, guys who write articles, who create content, because that's essentially what our job is. Our job is to make connections out of things that normally would not be connected.
But I'm gonna do that for the book. I'm gonna test run it with the book.
Cool.
That's what I'm gonna be doing. Yeah, because it's the same thing, but it's discipline. It's part of discipline. It's part of acquiring a new skill or upgrading the way you work and optimizing that. And I feel like this is a part that I never built an external brain. I've built external boxes, but not a second, external brain. So,
well, the thing with this too is like this could be considered what we call a meta skill as well, right? Because it'll apply to so many other disciplines in your life. It's not just for like one particular thing. Like you can use this. It's like I liken it to like, writing is a meta skill because your ability to communicate with a written word you can do that in your marketing. You can do that when you're writing, articles or whatever. And then presentation or speaking, that's also a meta skill. So I think your ability to take notes and make connections is a meta skill that can carry over into multiple disciplines in your life.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to happen at I would say at the expenses of your brain power or your RAM. Call it the RAM, but doesn't.
Well, it should. I mean, technically speaking, it should actually free up more of that to be creative.
That's exactly it.
Yeah,
and you should go faster because of that. Perform it. I love that.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna try it.
Big experiments coming.
Keep me follow up with me if
I will
later this season.
You know what I'll do is maybe what I'll do is I'll record a screencast for you to show you what my Obsidian looks like, and then like just the little connections that I make, and because now what I'm doing is I'm transferring the tech stuff over to Obsidian to be able to create those connections. So yeah, man,
I love it. To our listeners, if you have a system that you use for an external brain to create a second brain, if you've tried, if you have your own PKM, would love to hear you podcast at Done by Noon. No, what's the email?
Maybe you should put that in your PKM day.
Oh my gosh, terrible. That is Done by Noon podcast. I'm going on my website right now. Oh my God, that's it. I so need an external brain. I don't want to give you the wrong email to contact us, but contact at donebynoonpodcast.com. There you go. Obviously.
There you go.
So, send us an email. I'd like to learn about your PKM, what you use and how you use that. Let's connect. And I love it, Chris. Thanks so much. Like you opened my brain to more capacity. I like that.
Yeah, man. Let me know how it goes. We'll definitely check in because I want credit if you're writing your next book. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I think you'll. I don't want to say the title right now. I don't want. I'm not going to publicly say it because it can change. I've told it to a few people. I might tell you. I'll tell you offline. But it's yeah. I know. I think I'm pretty sure of exactly what it's going to be.
Good stuff, man.
All right, brother. Have a good week. Have a good week,
man.
everybody. Work on that external brain, and we'll talk next week.
You have just listened to the Done by Noon podcast. If you are interested in hearing more, do not hesitate to subscribe to our channel. Click on the 5 stars or check out our free tools and trainings at donebynoonpodcast.com. Thanks again for listening and stay awesome. We'll see you next time.